Before we begin, I ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you these untold stories of the famous. Hong Kong, 1973. The neon bled through the rain-slicked streets like spilled paint, and I could taste Thessady's hunger in the humid air. Another day at Golden Harvest, another step closer to something I couldn't name yet, something that felt bigger than Enter the Dragon, bigger than anything I'd done before. My muscles still burned from the morning's training. 6 hours of perfecting a single sequence, chasing that moment when technique transcends into art. Linda worried about the headaches, the way I pushed past exhaustion, but she didn't understand. I was running out of time to leave my mark on this world. Bruce! Raymond Chow's voice cut through the street noise. His expensive suit was wrinkled, unusual for him, and his eyes held that dangerous gleam of a producer who'd found his next obsession. What is it? I didn't slow down. I learned to read energy before words, and his was electric. There's someone you need to see. A young performer, different from anyone we've worked with. I'd heard this before. Every week brought another unique talent, wanting to ride my coattails. Another student? No. Raymond grabbed my arm, stopping me cold. This one fights like you've never seen. Like he's rewriting the rules while he moves. The certainty in his voice made me pause. Raymond had an eye for talent, but more than that, understood what separated authentic skill from imitation. If he was this excited, where? Studio B. Right now, we doubled back toward Golden Harvest, the building's lights cutting through the growing darkness. Raymond was practically vibrating with anticipation, talking fast about stunts and comedy and some kid named Jackie, but I wasn't listening anymore. Something in my chest had tightened. Not fear, but recognition. The feeling a hunter gets when he senses another predator in the territory. The studio corridor was empty except for us and the echo of our footsteps. Through the glass walls of Studio B, I could see lights blazing and hear sounds that made me stop. Crashes, laughter, and the unmistakable rhythm of combat. Then I saw him. A young man, maybe 20, was fighting 3 opponents at once. But this wasn't fighting as I knew it. He moved like water, finding its path down a mountain, effortless, unpredictable, somehow joyful. Head ducked under a punch while kicking a chair into one attacker, caught a thrown bottle, and used it to block another strike, then vaulted over a table with a fluidity that made my own precision feel mechanical. Jesus, I whispered. He wasn't just defeating his opponents. He was dancing with them, turning their aggression into art. Every movement told a story. Every counterattack contained a punchline. When he finished by somehow tying all 3 men together with a hanging rope, he stood back grinning like a child who just solved an impossible puzzle. Cut! The director's voice broke the spell, but I couldn't look away. The young man, Jackie, was still buzzing with energy, already scanning the set for his next challenge. What do you think? Raymond asked. Before I could answer, Jackie looked up and saw us through the glass. His eyes widened slightly, but not with the starstruck worship I usually encountered. This was different, professional curiosity meeting professional curiosity. He walked toward us with that same fluid grace, and when he stepped into the corridor, I was struck by how compact he was. Powerful, yes, but built like a gymnast rather than a warrior. His face was open, intelligent, marked by genuine humor rather than manufactured charm. Mr. Lee. His Cantonese was respectful, but not servile. It's an honor. I studied him the way I studied all fighters, looking for tells, for weaknesses, for the subtle signs that revealed true character. But Jackie's expression was refreshingly direct. Excited to meet me, certainly, but not intimidated. And underneath that excitement, something else. Quiet confidence in his own abilities. I saw your work, I said. Interesting approach. His smile transformed his entire face. Thank you. I've watched your films. Your precision is incredible, but I always wonder if fighting needs to be so. He paused, weighing his words. So what? So serious. I mean, it's life and death, I understand that. But maybe there's room for play too. Raymond looked like he wanted to disappear, but I found myself leaning forward. Play. Not play like it doesn't matter, Jackie said quickly. But like, when children fight, they're completely serious in the moment, but they're also creating something new each time. No two games are the same. Something shifted inside me. Here was someone who thought about martial arts as creation rather than destruction. Show me, sir. Show me this playful fighting. The corridor went silent. Jackie's grin returned, wider now, and he began to move, not into a fighting stance, but like he was casually cleaning the hallway. He bent to pick up imaginary dust, paused to admire his reflection in the polished floor, all while positioning himself with mathematical precision. It was so absurd I almost laughed. Then I saw the strategy. Every seemingly random movement was creating angles, distances, advantages. He was treating the space like a three-dimensional chessboard. I tested him with a straight punch. Not full speed, but serious enough. Most fighters would block or counter directly. Jackie ducked while pretending to pick something up from the floor, then popped up behind me and tapped my shoulder gently. "Excuse me," he said politely, "you dropped this." Despite myself, I laughed. Actually laughed. "Raymond," I said, not taking my eyes off Jackie, "cancel my dinner plans." Jackie straightened, his playful demeanor shifting. "Mr. Lee, I hope I didn't." "You surprised me," I interrupted. "That doesn't happen often." We stood there in the fluorescent-lit corridor, something electric building between us. I could feel it, the beginning of a conversation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about fighting, about cinema, about the very nature of what we did. "There's a question forming in my mind," I said slowly, "about the difference between perfection and innovation, between killing and creating." Jackie nodded. "I'd like to explore that with you." As we walked back toward the studio, my pulse quickened. Here was someone who approached martial arts from a completely different angle. Someone who saw combat as expression rather than domination. What would happen when my precision met his creativity? When my intensity encountered his joy? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Jackie's footsteps echoed mine in the empty corridor. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered that this casual encounter was about to become something much more dangerous. Something that would test not just our bodies, but everything we believed about what it meant to fight. I looked at Jackie Chan walking beside me, still radiating that infectious energy, and felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just going to be a conversation. This was going to be a reckoning. I couldn't sleep that night. Linda found me at 3 in the morning on our apartment balcony, staring out at the harbor lights, my mind replaying every movement I'd witnessed in that studio corridor. "What's troubling you?" she asked, settling beside me with 2 cups of tea. "I met someone today, a young fighter." I accepted the warm cup gratefully. "He moves like no one I've ever seen." "Better than you?" The question hung in the humid air between us. Better was the wrong word. Different was more accurate. Where I carved through space with surgical precision, Jackie flowed through it like smoke. Where I eliminated variables, he created them. It wasn't better or worse. It was something else entirely. "Different," I said finally. "And that makes him dangerous." The next morning, Raymond called before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. "Golden Harvest wants to set up some training sessions. You and Jackie working together on action sequences. The executives think there might be potential for collaboration." I found myself agreeing before I'd consciously decided. Something about Jackie Chan demanded further investigation. When I arrived at the studio, he was already there, warming up in a corner with movements that looked more like dance than martial arts. He noticed me immediately and bounded over with that infectious energy I was beginning to recognize as his signature. "Mr. Lee, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Call me Bruce. And I wanted to understand what I saw yesterday." We began with basic forms, feeling each other out. I demonstrated the straight-line efficiency of Wing Chun, the explosive power that had made me famous. Jackie watched with genuine appreciation, then showed me something that made my breath catch, a sequence that combined traditional kung fu with acrobatics I'd only seen in Peking opera. "Where did you learn to move like that?" "The China Drama Academy," he said, launching into a handstand that transitioned seamlessly into a-spinning kick. "Master Yu Jim Yuen taught us that everything was connected. Singing, acting, acrobatics, fighting. He said if you could make an audience laugh, cry, and gasp all in the same moment, you'd found the secret. And if you wanted to hurt someone, Jackie landed gracefully, considering the question. Well, if someone really wanted to hurt me, I tried to make them laugh first. Hard to stay angry when you're laughing. It was such a fundamentally different approach to conflict that I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite admiration, not quite concern. Here was someone who saw fighting as communication rather than domination. Over the following weeks, we found ourselves training together regularly. The studio executives were thrilled, sensing something marketable in our partnership, but they didn't understand what was really happening between us. We weren't just sharing techniques. We were conducting a philosophical debate with our bodies. I showed Jackie the devastating efficiency of my one-inch punch, how to generate maximum force with minimal movement. He absorbed it instantly, then somehow made it playful, turning the same principle into a gentle push that sent his practice partner stumbling backward in surprise rather than pain. "You're diluting the technique," I said, unable to hide my frustration. "Or I'm expanding it," Jackie replied cheerfully. What if the goal isn't to hurt someone, but to surprise them so completely they forget why they wanted to fight? In return, Jackie taught me things my rigid training had never considered. How to use furniture as weapons, how to turn a stumble into an attack, how to fight with joy instead of anger. But every lesson came with that same philosophical challenge. His assumption that violence could be transformed into something lighter, more human. "Watch this," he said one afternoon, setting up an elaborate obstacle course with chairs, tables, and hanging ropes. "Fight me through this, but try to smile while you do it. Smile. Trust me." What followed was unlike any sparring session I'd ever experienced. Jackie led me through a choreographed chaos where every attack had to account for environmental variables, where every block required creative problem-solving. And despite myself, I found the corners of my mouth turning upward. There was something liberating about abandoning pure efficiency in favor of adaptation. But liberation came with a cost. When I returned to my regular training, my movements felt constrained, predictable. My one-inch punch, perfected through years of practice, suddenly seemed limited. What if there were a dozen different ways to generate that same power? What if efficiency wasn't the highest goal? "You're thinking too much," my old training partner Dan Innocento observed after I failed to execute a basic technique properly. "What's changed?" "Everything," I wanted to say. But how could I explain that a young comedian was unraveling principles it spent my entire life perfecting? The tension came to a head during a particularly intense training session. We were working on a scene that required Jackie to disarm multiple opponents using only everyday objects. He made it look effortless, turning a simple broom into a weapon of elegant destruction. "Impressive," I said. "But what happens when your opponent doesn't play along with your improvisation?" "What do you mean?" "What happens when someone fights you who doesn't care about your creativity? Someone who just wants to hurt you as efficiently as possible?" Jackie's smile faltered slightly. "I suppose I'd have to adapt." "Show me." I attacked him then, not with malicious intent, but with the cold efficiency that had made me legendary. No room for improvisation, no environmental variables to exploit, just pure technique designed to overwhelm through superior speed and precision. For the first time since I'd met him, Jackie looked genuinely surprised. He managed to avoid my initial strikes, but I could see him struggling to find the creative solutions that came so naturally to him. His movements became more conventional, more like mine, and in doing so, he lost the very quality that made him special. "Stop," he said after a particularly close call left him off balance. We stood there breathing hard, the studio suddenly feeling too small for both of us. "That wasn't fair," Jackie said quietly. "Fair." The word came out sharper than I intended. Who told you fighting was supposed to be fair? No one. But it doesn't have to be ugly either. Ugly. Now I was truly angry. There's nothing ugly about perfection. Nothing ugly about effectiveness. There's if it's all you have. The words hit me like a physical blow. All around us, the studio seemed to hold its breath. Equipment hummed quietly. Lights blazed overhead, but the space between Jackie and me had become charged with something that felt dangerous. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jackie looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Pity. You're the most skilled fighter I've ever met, Bruce. But you fight like you're angry at the world. Like you're trying to prove something with every move. And you fight like it's all a game. Maybe it is, he said softly. Maybe that's the point. We stared at each other across the studio floor, two completely different philosophies made flesh. I could feel something building between us. Not hatred, but something more complex. Respect mixed with challenge. Admiration tangled with the need to prove superiority. There's only one way to settle this, I heard myself saying. Jackie nodded slowly. I was thinking the same thing. The studio around us seemed to fade into background noise. This wasn't about training anymore, or collaboration, or even friendship. This was about something fundamental, about whether fighting was art or science, whether strength came from rigid discipline or fluid adaptation. Tomorrow night, I said, after the studio closes. Tomorrow night, Jackie agreed. As I walked out of Golden Harvest that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine uncertainty about the outcome of a fight. Jackie Chan had done something no opponent had ever managed. He made me question not just my techniques, but the very philosophy that drove them. The city lights blurred past as I drove home, but all I could see was that moment of pity in Jackie's eyes. Tomorrow night, I would show him that some things couldn't be turned into games. Tomorrow night, we would find out which of us was right. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. Hong Kong stretched out below me, millions of lights twinkling like fallen stars, but all I could see was Jackie's face in that moment before we'd agreed to fight. Not fear. I would have understood fear. Not anger. Anger I could work with. It was something worse, complete confidence in his own approach to combat. Linda found me there at dawn, still in the same chair. You didn't sleep, she said, setting a cup of tea beside me. Couldn't. She studied my face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read my moods like weather patterns. This isn't just about fighting techniques, is it? I wanted to tell her everything. About the doubt that had crept into my certainty, about the way Jackie's philosophy challenged everything I'd built my life on, about the growing suspicion that maybe, just maybe, I'd been approaching martial arts with unnecessary limitation. But how could I explain that to her without sounding like I was having some kind of breakdown? He fights like rules don't apply to him, I said finally. And that scares you? It should scare everyone. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. What scared me wasn't Jackie's unconventional approach. It was how natural it looked on him, how effortlessly he bent reality to accommodate his vision of combat. I'd spent years perfecting techniques, eliminating variables, creating predictable outcomes. Jackie treated every fight like an improvisation, and somehow it worked. Linda placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Maybe that's something to learn from, not fight against. Some things can't be compromised on, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. I spent the morning in solitary training, pushing my body through forms I'd practiced 10,000 times. Each movement was precise, economical, devastatingly effective. This was what mastery looked like, the complete elimination of wasted motion, the perfect marriage of speed and power. Jackie might have creativity, but I had certainty, except the certainty felt hollow now. By noon, word had somehow spread through the studio that something was happening between Jackie and me. Not the details, Raymond and I had agreed this needed to stay private, but the energy was unmistakable. Crew members watched us differently. Conversations stopped when we passed, and I caught several people making quiet bets about outcomes they didn't fully understand. I glimpsed Jackie across the lot during lunch break. He was teaching a group of stuntmen some complex sequence involving a ladder, 2 chairs, and what appeared to be a rubber chicken. Even from a distance, I could hear their laughter. He turned mid-explanation and caught my eye across the courtyard. Neither of us waved or acknowledged the other, but something passed between us, the recognition that we were both counting down hours to something that couldn't be undone. The afternoon dragged like a slow fever. I tried to focus on my regular work, but every movement felt mechanical, disconnected from the flow state that usually carried me through demanding sequences. Mid-stunt coordinators noticed immediately. "You're off today," Bob Wall observed after I fumbled a basic combination for the third time. "Your timing's a fraction slow." A fraction. In my world, fractions were the difference between legend and mediocrity, between life and death. If Jackie had already gotten into my head enough to affect my performance. "I'm fine," I lied. But I wasn't fine. For the first time in years, I was genuinely uncertain about the outcome of a fight. Not because I doubted my technical superiority. I knew I was faster, stronger, more experienced. But Jackie fought by different rules, and I was beginning to suspect that my rules might not apply to him. At 6 o'clock, I left the studio and drove aimlessly through Hong Kong's early evening traffic. The city moved around me in its usual controlled chaos. Buses weaving between taxis, pedestrians flowing across streets like water, finding its level, vendors calling out prices for fish and vegetables and promises. It all looked the same as always, but something fundamental had shifted in my perception. I found myself outside the Tiger Balm Garden, a place I'd often come to think. The elaborate statues and winding paths had always reminded me that martial arts existed in a larger context. Part art, part philosophy, part practical necessity. Tonight, walking among the carved figures of legendary warriors and mythical beasts, I wondered if I'd been too focused on the practical necessity and lost sight of everything else. My phone rang. "Raymond." "Bruce, just confirming tonight is still happening. The studio will be empty after 9. It's happening. Are you sure this is wise? I mean, what if someone gets seriously hurt?" I almost laughed. "Raymond, one of us is going to lose tonight. That's the point. But the potential damage to both your careers. Some things matter more than careers." After I hung up, I sat on a bench facing a statue of Guan Yu, the warrior god of loyalty and righteousness. His stone face was serene despite the massive blade in his hands, as if he'd found perfect balance between violence and wisdom. I'd always admired that balance, but now I wondered if I'd achieved only a violence part. By 8:30, I was back at Golden Harvest. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just a few cars belonged to security guards and cleaning crews. The building felt different at night, larger somehow, full of shadows and possibilities that daylight kept hidden. I made my way to Studio B, the same space where I'd first watched Jackie transform combat into something that looked suspiciously like joy. My footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, each sound seeming to count down to a moment that would define not just tonight, but everything that came after. The studio door was unlocked. Jackie was already there, sitting cross-legged in the center of the space, perfectly still in a way that reminded me he was more than just a comedian with fighting skills. His eyes were closed, but I knew he dared me enter. Around him, the studio equipment cast long shadows under the harsh fluorescent lights. Cameras, cables, props that during the day would be tools for creating illusions, but tonight felt like witnesses to something real. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said without opening his eyes. "Did you think I wouldn't? I hope you would." He stood up in one fluid motion, and I was reminded again of how deceptively powerful he was despite his compact frame. "But I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd changed your mind." "Why?" For the first time since I'd met him, Jackie's expression was completely serious. "Because tonight we find out which one of us has been lying to himself." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. We stood there in the empty studio, two men who dedicated their lives to understanding violence, about to test philosophies that couldn't coexist. I began removing my jacket, then my shirt, preparing my body for what was coming. Jackie did the same, revealing the lean muscle and old scars that told the story of a life spent pushing physical limits. But where my preparation was methodical, ritualistic, his was almost casual, like he was getting ready for a swim rather than a fight that could end either of our careers. "Ground rules?" I asked. "No rules," Jackie replied immediately. "That's the point, isn't it? Your way versus mine, with nothing in between." No rules meant different things to each of us, and we both knew it. For me, it meant the full application of techniques designed to end conflicts quickly and decisively. For Jackie, it meant treating the entire space as a canvas for improvisation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, Hong Kong continued its nightly rhythm, oblivious to what was about to happen in this anonymous studio. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but elevated, my body preparing for combat in ways that had become automatic over years of training. Jackie moved to the opposite side of the studio, but instead of assuming a traditional fighting stance, hesitantly stood there, relaxed, almost casual. It was unnerving, like facing an opponent who didn't understand the seriousness of what we were about to do. But his eyes told a different story. They held the same intensity I'd seen in my own reflection during the darkest moments of my training. The look of someone willing to risk everything to prove a point that mattered more than safety, more than reputation, more than the comfortable certainties that had carried him this far. "Last chance to walk away," I said, though I knew neither of us would take it. "Same to you," Jackie replied. We looked at each other across the studio floor, two completely different approaches to the same fundamental question. What did it mean to fight? I represented tradition, discipline, the perfection of established principles. Jackie represented innovation, adaptation, the belief that rules existed to be transcended. Only one of us could be right. I took a deep breath, feeling my muscles settle into the familiar patterns of readiness. Across from me, Jackie began to move, not toward me, but in a small circle like he was testing the space, learning its rhythms. The moment stretched between us, loaded with everything we'd built toward over the past weeks. Then Jackie stopped circling and looked directly at me. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. And in that instant before the first move was made, before philosophy became reality, I realized that no matter who won tonight, both of us would be changed forever by what was about to happen. The silence in the studio was absolute. Then Jackie smiled. Not his usual infectious grin, but something sharper, more dangerous. And everything began. I moved first. No warning, no ceremony, just the explosive release of energy I'd perfected over years of training. My lead foot launched me forward like a bullet from a gun, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. My right fist cut through the air with surgical precision, aimed at the exact spot where Jackie's jaw met his neck. A strike designed to end things immediately. He wasn't there. Somehow, impossibly, Jackie had shifted his weight just enough to let my fist pass through empty air. Not a dramatic dodge, not a desperate leap, just a subtle adjustment that made my perfect technique look clumsy. Before I could recover, he tapped my extended arm gently, almost politely, as if to say, "Nice try." The casual dismissal of my opening attack ignited something primal in my chest. I spun into a back fist that should have caught him off guard, followed immediately by a low kick designed to sweep his legs. Basic combinations, brutally effective, executed with a speed that had Madim legendary. But Jackie flowed around them like water, each evasion so minimal it looked accidental. Hess stumbled backward, arms windmilling for balance, and for a split second I thought I had him. Then I realized the stumble was fake. His momentum carried him into a backward roll that brought him up beside a folding chair. In one fluid motion, he grabbed it and swung it toward my head, not to hurt me, but to force me to duck. As I dropped low, he vaulted over me using the chair as leverage, landing behind me with cat-like grace. "Interesting opening," he said cheerfully, as if we were discussing the weather. I turned to face him, my mind racing. In those first exchanges, Jackie had demonstrated something that shouldn't have been possible. He'd made my precision look predictable. Every technique I'd thrown had been perfect in isolation, but he treated them like moves in a chess game he was 3 steps ahead of. This time I didn't rush. I began to stalk him, cutting off angles, forcing him into corners where improvisation would be harder. My footwork was methodical, patient, designed to eliminate his options one by one. This was what real fighting looked like. Not flashy demonstrations, but the systematic removal of an opponent's choices until only defeat remained. Jackie seemed to understand what I was doing, and for the first time, I saw a genuine concern flicker across his features. He was running out of room to maneuver, the studio walls closing in behind him. Good. Let him feel what it was like to face someone who'd eliminated chance from combat. I feinted with a high kick, then drove my fist toward his solar plexus when he moved a block. This time there was nowhere for him to flow, no creative solution to the simple problem of physics meeting flesh. My knuckles connected, but instead of the satisfying impact of a clean hit, I felt something strange. Jackie had somehow twisted at the last instant, turning what should have been a devastating body shot into a glancing blow that spun him sideways. He used the momentum to grab a hanging cable and swing himself away from the wall, escaping the trap I'd so carefully constructed. "You hit hard," he said, rubbing his ribs but still smiling. "But you telegraph everything." Telegraph? I'd spent years eliminating telegraphing from my techniques. My strikes came from neutral positions, with no warning, no wasted motion. But as Jackie spoke, I realized he wasn't reading my individual techniques. He was reading my intentions, seeing the larger patterns that connected my movements. He was fighting the idea of me rather than just my body. The realization made me furious. I launched myself at him with everything I had, a barrage of strikes designed to overwhelm through sheer volume and precision. Straight punches, hooks, elbows, knees, each technique flowing into the next without pause. This wasn't about strategy anymore. This was about proving that perfection couldn't be outsmarted by creativity. For a moment, it worked. Jackie's evasions became more desperate, his movements less controlled. I could see him starting to panic as my relentless assault pushed him past the limits of what improvisation could handle. A spinning back fist grazed his temple, hard enough to stagger him. A low kick connected with his thigh, deadening the muscle. Then something extraordinary happened. Instead of trying to escape or counter my attacks, Jackie began to dance with them. He grabbed a camera boom and used it to swing himself around my kick, landed on a prop table, and immediately rolled off the other side to avoid my follow-up punch. When I pursued him, he somehow managed to grab a coil off rope and sent it spinning toward my feet, not to trip me, but to force me to jump, which put me momentarily off balance. Every prop in the studio became part of his defense. Light stands became obstacles. Equipment cases became stepping stones. Even the scattered scripts on the floor became potential distractions. He was turning the entire space into an extension of his body, using it to multiply his options exponentially. But I was faster and stronger and more experienced. When Jackie grabbed another chair to put between us, I didn't try to go around it. I went through it. My foot shattered the wooden seat, sending splinters flying, and continued toward his chest. He managed to whisk away, but not completely. My heel caught his shoulder, spinning him hard into a bank of equipment. The crash was tremendous. Lights flickered, cables sparked, and Jackie slumped against the wall, breathing hard for the first time since we'd started. "Stay down," I said, advancing on him. "You've proven your point." But Jackie wasn't listening. He was looking at something behind me with an expression I couldn't read. It turned just in time to see a heavy light falling toward my head. Apparently, my kick had damaged more than just the chair. I rolled forward, the light crashing where I'd been standing, and when I came up, Jackie was already moving. But something had changed in his demeanor. The playfulness was gone, replaced by something sharper, more focused. He'd seen me destroy his improvised weapon without hesitation, had watched Met earn his environment against him, and now he understood that this wasn't just a sparring session. This was survival. "My turn," he said quietly. What followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in combat. Jackie stopped trying to evade my attacks and started to redirect them. When I threw a punch, he would deflect it just enough to send me past him, then use my own momentum to position me exactly where he wanted me. When I kicked, he would catch my leg and guide it toward a prop that would break dramatically, creating debris and distraction while he moved to a better position. He was treating my aggression like a river, channeling it in directions that serve his purposes rather than fighting against it directly. And for the first time in years, I found myself struggling to predict what would happen next. A straight punch toward his face became a comedy routine when he ducked and my fist went through a foam wall, leaving me momentarily stuck. A sweeping kick, meant to drop him, instead sent him in a perfect forward roll that ended with him grabbing a length of chain from prop box. When I freed my hand and turned to face him, he was already spinning the chain in complex patterns that made it impossible to approach directly. "This is what I mean about rules," he said, the chain whistling through the air between us. "You keep trying to fight the same fight you always fight. But this isn't that fight." He was right. And that realization hit me harder than any physical blow. I've been trying to impose my framework on a situation that didn't conform to it. Every technique I'd mastered, every principle it perfected, assumed an opponent who would engage on my terms. But Jackie refused to play by those rules. I needed to adapt. When he swung the chain toward me, instead of blocking or dodging, I caught it. The metal links bit into me palm, drawing blood, but I held on and used Jackie's own leverage to pull him toward me. His eyes widened as he realized his weapon had become a liability, but by then it was too late. My elbow met his solar plexus with the full force of our combined momentum. Jackie folded like a piece of paper, the chain falling from nerveless fingers as he struggled to breathe. I followed up immediately, not giving him time to recover, driving a knee toward his ribs that would have ended the fight definitively. He caught it. Somehow, even winded and off balance, Jackie managed to grab my incoming knee and use it as leverage to flip himself backward and away from me. He landed hard on the studio floor, rolled twice, and came up in a defensive crouch, still fighting for air, but undeniably still fighting. "Ow!" I demanded. "How are you still moving?" Jackie smiled through his obvious pain. "Because you're trying to end this quickly, and I'm trying to make it last forever." The philosophical difference hit me like a revelation. I fought to win, to dominate, to prove superiority through decisive action. Jackie fought to continue, to explore, to find new possibilities within conflict itself. We weren't just using different techniques, we were fighting for different reasons. And in that moment of understanding, I felt something I'd never experienced in combat before: doubt about whether victory was even the right goal. Jackie used my hesitation to grab a piece of broken equipment and throw it at the main light switch. The studio plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the emergency lighting and the glow from the corridor outside. In the sudden dimness, I lost track of him completely. I closed my eyes, relying on other senses to track his movement. The soft scrape of fabric against metal, the barely audible shift of weight from one foot to another. He was circling me, staying just outside my reach, using the darkness to reset the terms of our engagement. "Can you fight what you can't see?" His voice came from somewhere to my left. I spun toward it, but he was already gone. A gentle tap on my right shoulder told me he'd moved behind. I whirled again, striking at empty air. "Can you defeat something that won't stay still long enough to be defeated?" This time his voice came from above. I looked up to see him perched on a camera rig, somehow having climbed there in complete silence. He dropped down, not to attack, but to land gracefully just outside my range, and immediately begin moving again. In the dim light, his movements looked almost supernatural, flowing from position to position without visible transition, using equipment and shadows and angles I couldn't track to stay perpetually just beyond my reach. It was like fighting smoke or water or some force of nature that couldn't be pinned down long enough to be conquered. But I was Bruce Lee, and if there was one thing I'd learned in my years of training, it was that everything had weaknesses. Even creativity had limits. I stopped trying to track him and instead began to limit his options. A series of devastating kicks took out support columns for equipment he might use for leverage. Punches shattered props that could serve as weapons or shields. I turned his own strategy against him, reducing the environment to bare essentials until creativity would have fewer tools to work with. Jackie's laughter echoed through the darkened studio. "Now you're learning." But as I destroyed his improvisational arsenal, I realized he was learning too. Each of my attacks was becoming more predictable as I focused on environmental targets rather than him directly. And Jackie was using that predictability against me, positioning himself so that my strikes would clear pathways Hewitt had cleared, eliminate obstacles that were actually hindering his movement rather than helping it. He was making me complicit in my own defeat. The understanding came just as Jackie launched himself from the top of an equipment rack I'd been trying to destroy. His flying kick caught me squarely in the chest, sending me staggering backward into a bank of monitors. Sparks flew as expensive equipment shattered, and I felt something sharp slice across my back. But as I fell, I managed to grab Jackie's ankle and drag him down with me. We hit the ground together, rolling apart and immediately scrambling to our feet. For the first time since the fight began, we were close enough to see each other clearly in the emergency lighting. Jackie's clothes were torn, his face marked by small cuts and growing bruises. I could taste blood from a split lip, felt the sting of dozens of minor wounds. But neither of us was finished. "Last chance to quit," I said, though I knew he wouldn't take it. "Same to you," Jackie replied, settling into a stance I'd never seen before, something that looked like traditional kung fu but felt completely improvised. We circled each other in the wreckage of the studio, two men who'd pushed each other far beyond what either had expected. The fight had evolved from a clash of techniques into something more fundamental, a confrontation between two completely different ways of understanding what it meant to be human in conflict. I represented control, mastery, the perfection of form. Jackie represented adaptation, creativity, the belief that rules existed to be transcended. And in the dim light of that ruined studio, I realized that both approaches had brought us to exactly the same place, battered, exhausted, and still unable to defeat each other. "One more exchange," I said. "Everything we have." Jackie nodded. "Everything." We moved toward each other one final time, but something had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by something like respect. The need to prove superiority had transformed into curiosity about what would happen when irresistible force truly met immovable object. I gathered every technique I'd ever mastered into a single, devastating combination. Speed, power, precision, timing, everything I'd learned about combat condensed into a sequence designed to end any fight against any opponent. Jackie met it with pure improvisation, turning my attack into a strange dance where every strike became an opportunity for creative response, every block flowing into unexpected counterattacks that used meowed force against me. For perhaps 10 seconds, we existed in a space between combat and art, each of us pushing the other to heights neither could have reached alone. My precision forced Jackie to find new levels of creativity. His improvisation forced me to discover flexibility I didn't know I possessed. Then, simultaneously, we both threw strikes that should have ended everything. My perfectly timed straight punch meeting his impossibly creative spinning attack at the exact center point between us. The impact sent us both flying backward. I hit the wall and slid to the floor, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. Across the studio, Jackie had landed in a heap near the door, motionless except for the rise and fall of his chest. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The studio was silent except for the electrical hum of damaged equipment and the sound of our labored breathing. Then Jackie began to laugh. Not the triumphant laughter of victory, but something deeper, the sound of someone who discovered something unexpected about himself. After a moment, I found myself joining him, though I couldn't have explained why. We'd beaten each other into mutual exhaustion, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of equipment, and proven absolutely nothing about which approach to fighting was superior. And, somehow, that felt like the most important victory either of us had ever achieved. "Draw?" Jackie asked, struggling to sit up. "Draw," I agreed, using the wall to pull myself to my feet. We looked at each other across the wreckage we'd created, two men who'd entered this space, certain off their own philosophies, and emerged with something more valuable than certainty: understanding. The fight was over, but in a way that neither of us could have predicted, it was also just beginning. We sat in the wreckage for nearly an hour, neither of us speaking much. The studio looked like a war zone. Broken equipment scattered across the floor, cables hanging like dead snakes from damaged fixtures, props reduced to splinters and scrap metal. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, making a destruction look even more complete. Jackie found a relatively intact chair and dragged it over to where I was leaning against the wall. He moved carefully, favoring his left side where my elbow had connected, but there was something peaceful in his expression that I'd never seen before. "I need to ask you something," he said, settling into the chair with a small wince. "What? Did you hold back?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked, taking in the cuts and bruises that marked his face, the way he held his ribs, the exhaustion that radiated from every line of his body. Then I considered my own condition, the taste of blood in my mouth, the burning sensation across my back where I'd hit the monitors, the deep ache in my chest where his flying kick had connected. "No," I said finally. "Did you?" Jackie shook his head. Not for a second. We absorbed that truth in silence. Neither of us had held back. Neither had shown mercy or pulled punches. We'd given everything we had to the question of which approach to fighting was superior, and the answer we'd received was both and neither. "Raymond's going to kill us," Jackie said eventually, looking around at the destroyed studio. "Raymond's going to have us killed," I corrected, and we both began laughing again. That strange, exhausted laughter of men who'd survived something they shouldn't have attempted in the first place. As the laughter faded, Jackie stood up slowly. "I should go, before security makes their rounds." I nodded, but neither of us moved toward the door. There was something unfinished between us, some acknowledgement that needed to be made before we returned to the world outside this destroyed space. "You were right about something," I said finally. "What?" "Fighting doesn't have to be about proving superiority. It can be about discovery." Jackie smiled, and for a moment he looked younger than his years. "You were right, too. Sometimes precision is the only thing that matters. Sometimes there's no room for play." Sometimes I agreed. He extended his hand, and I took it. The handshake was firm despite our exhaustion, carrying the weight off everything we'd learned about each other and ourselves over the past hour. "Will you tell anyone about this?" Jackie asked. "Would you believe me if I said no?" "I believe you." "Then no. Some things are meant to stay private." Jackie nodded. "Like sacred things." "Sacred?" Yes, that was exactly what this had been. Not a fight, but a ritual. Not a competition, but a conversation between two different languages of movement, each teaching the other new vocabulary. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Bruce." "Yeah. Next time, let's use a bigger studio." I was still laughing when the door closed behind him. Alone in the wreckage, I took my time getting to my feet. Every movement reminded me of what we just put our bodies through, but beneath the pain was something else, a strange sense of completion, as if I'd answered a question I hadn't known I was asking. I made my way slowly through Hong Kong's empty streets, the city quiet except for the occasional taxi or late-night food vendor. The neon signs reflected off wet pavement in familiar patterns, but everything looked subtly different now, as if the fight had shifted some fundamental aspect of my perception. When I finally reached home, Linda was waiting up for me. "Jesus, Bruce," she breathed, taking in my battered appearance. "What happened?" I looked at myself in the hallway mirror for the first time since leaving the studio. My clothes were torn and dirty, my face marked by small cuts, and one spectacular bruise along my jawline. But my eyes looked different somehow. Calmer, more certain about uncertainty. "I learned something," I said, "about fighting, about everything." She helped me clean my wounds, neither of us talking much as she worked. When she finished, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring out at the harbor lights and thinking about the path that had brought me to Hat's studio tonight. I'd spent my entire life pursuing perfection, in technique, in philosophy, in the expression of martial arts through cinema. I believed that mastery meant eliminating variables, controlling outcomes, achieving predictable excellence. And I'd been right as far as that path could take me. But Jackie had shown me something else entirely, that there were other kinds of strength, other forms of mastery. That creativity could be as disciplined as tradition, that adaptation could be as powerful as perfection. I thought about the moment when we both struck simultaneously, when his improvisation had met my precision in perfect balance. For those few seconds, we'd existed in a space where all the rules of combat had been suspended, where pure human expression had taken precedence over winning and losing. That was the moment when I understood that I'd been asking the wrong questions my entire career. It wasn't about whether discipline was superior to creativity or whether tradition was better than innovation. It was about integration, about finding ways to honor both paths without diminishing either. But integration took time. And time, I was beginning to suspect, was something I might not have in abundance. The headaches had been getting worse. The exhaustion came more frequently. There were moments, usually late at night like this one, when I felt a strange disconnection from my own body, as if the perfect machine I'd spent years building was somehow running down. I'd never mentioned these concerns to Linda or to anyone else. How could I explain that the body that had made me famous felt increasingly foreign to me? That sometimes, in the middle of a flawless technique, I felt like I was watching someone else perform it? Tonight's fight had been different. For the first time in months, I'd felt completely present in my physical form. Every sense heightened, every movement connected to intention. Fighting Jackie had reconnected me to something essential about myself that I'd feared I was losing. But now, sitting in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, I could feel that disconnection returning. The clear certainty I'd experienced in the studio was already beginning to fade, replaced by the familiar fog of fatigue and disorientation. I looked at my hands that had struck with perfect precision just hours ago, and wondered how many more fights they contained. How many more films? How many more opportunities to integrate what Jackie had taught me about the relationship between discipline and freedom? Linda stirred in her sleep, and I realized I'd been sitting there for over an hour, lost in thoughts that circled around questions I couldn't answer. Outside, Hong Kong was beginning to wake up. Early morning vendors were setting up their stalls, delivery trucks were making their rounds, and soon the city would be fully alive with its usual controlled chaos. In a few hours, Jackie and I would both return to our separate worlds. He to his comedy films and stunt work, me to whatever came next in a career that felt increasingly urgent and uncertain. But something had changed between us that couldn't be unchanged. We'd seen each other at our absolute limits, had pushed each other beyond what either thought possible, and in doing so had discovered new territories in ourselves. The fight would remain our secret, but the knowledge we'd gained from it would shape everything that came after. For Jackie, perhaps it would inform the unique blend of comedy and action that would eventually make him a global star. For me, it would be a reminder that even perfection could be improved upon, that even mastery could learn new lessons. I finally lay down next to Linda, careful not to wake her, and close my eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. That my mind kept returning to that moment of perfect balance, when his unpredictability had met my precision and created something entirely new. In years to come, people would wonder what might have happened if Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan had ever truly faced each other. They would debate the outcome, argue about techniques and philosophies, create endless speculation about a meeting that seemed tantalizingly possible but never occurred. They would never know that it had happened. That on a humid night in 1973, in a darkened studio filled with broken equipment and the echoes of laughter, two men had discovered that some questions were more important than their answers. And as I finally drifted toward sleep, I carried with me the image of Jackie Chan walking away into the Hong Kong night, compact, resilient, still radiating that infectious energy that made even exhaustion look like the beginning of something new. We had fought each other to a standstill. But more than that, we had fought ourselves into becoming something neither of us had been before, complete. The secret would die with us, but the understanding would live forever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.